Welcome to the Dr. Berkson's Best Health Radio Show. The sun is out in Austin, Texas. We have had a rainy, dank, that's the right word to use for our weather the last few months, kind of dank weather in Austin, Texas. So on this sunny day, I got into my Lindsay mobile and drove over to the post office. I love going there because it's fun getting mail still, snail mail, but it's also a scene where unusual things and interactions with people, for some reason, for me, tend to happen. Whether you're holding the door open for someone else and then another person holds it open for you. So you have this old-time sense of camaraderie and helpfulness, or just things seem to happen because there you are with a bunch of people standing in line, people you would never meet any other reason. So I was at the desk talking with one of the people who works there, the post office staff, this woman, brand new woman I'd never met before. And I borrowed a scissors so I can open up one of the packages I just received. And it was a big book on nutrition with pictures of flax seeds and wheatgrass and things on the cover. And I held it up to her and I said, "Isn't this beautiful?" And she looked at me, and that just opened up a well of personal information, and we built a bridge together. She said, "Oh my God, I got to tell you, I lost 75 pounds in the last year. Before that, had been the kind of person who ended up in the ER once a month. I was overweight. I was inflamed. I hurt all the time. I had chronic migraines. And a year ago, I discovered nutrition. I just gave up sugar, gave up foods that feed inflammation, stopped going to the ER and taking more medication." She said, "I used to be on 13 medications a year ago. A year ago. And now," she stood up, "look at me. I'm not on any medications." I said, "You did this all with food." She said, "Not only did I do this all with food, I did this all myself." And I looked at the other ladies that were also working behind the desk and getting in on our conversation, and I shared my age and a little bit about me, and they jumped over, which is, I think, against the rules, and we all gave each other a big group grope because we realized the power of food, the power of proactivity and self-help, and the power of sisterhood. It was all us ladies there who had made these changes and had risked getting fired by opening up the door and coming around and giving a big group grope hug. That is the deal. There is a lot that we can do ourselves, and we can sometimes work in tandem with our docs, and then sometimes we should be working really not with our docs at all. We should supersede what they say because as much as we need medicine, sometimes we can be harmed by medicine. It's a love-hate relationship, really a love-hate relationship. And that's what the show is on today. And by the way, if you love these shows and you want to read some of my blogs, you can go to drlindsayberkson.com. The point of this show is that medicine, the template that it has presently, is set up to diagnose you and track you to see when you're getting worse. And when you really get worse, then they have all these big guns to jump in with interventions, pharmaceuticals, procedures, so they can at least maintain you in your ill state, dependent in a selfless help kind of manner. But the point is, what was happening underneath the surface that was driving these diseases? And do we have a look-see window into these molecules that drive disease? And can we run these molecules and figure out if we're at risk, or how to prevent recurrence, or how to get better from a diagnosis? So I was talking to, you all mostly know that I worked in a dialysis center for 10 years with one of the top nephrologists in the world. In fact, a few years ago, he was honored with 6 other kidney doctors at Sunnybrook as being one of the 7 kidney docs that made kidney medicine, or nephrology, what it is today. So I care a lot about kidney medicine. And I was talking with a nephrologist here in town. And I said, you basically run a basic estimated glomerular filtration rate, which is figuring out how the filtering system of the kidney is doing, or a 24-hour creatinine, protein in the urine kind of monitor, and you just keep watching to see when people go from stage 1 kidney disease to 2 to 3. And then as they get more ill, you're going to jump in with meds. But what if you had these molecules that are well established by prestigious institutions that really are what is driving the kidney damage? And you could assess the level of those molecules in a kidney patient and perhaps even tamp them down to alter the clinical course of traffic. So instead of them going down as they age with further disability, further filtering function of their kidney, what if you could improve their kidney and defy aging and defy degeneration with regeneration? He said, if you could take one of my kidney patients that's at stage 2 kidney disease and show me that these molecules were elevated, and use your magic nutritional know-how to lower those molecules and bring that stage 2 kidney disease, which is worse than stage 1, back up to a stage 1. If you could do that in 4 months, Dr. William Rodriguez said to me, if you could do that by next March, I would become a functional medicine kidney doc. He said, I would start teaching for you. I said, no. You couldn't start teaching in functional medicine. You'd have to first be a student and learn it. And then you could take your know-how and mix it with that and start teaching. In fact, as you all know, I teach in some of the higher board certification programs for medical practitioners to become certified in functional medicine. And I'm really struck that there's a weekend for environmental medicine, a weekend for hormone medicine, for cardiology, for rejuvenative orthopedic, but there is none for nephrology. There are no functional nephrologists. There aren't kidney doctors really taking a look at this, even though there are molecules that worsen kidney function, and you can attempt, because there's articles in the literature that show that nutrition reverses these molecules, turn the tide. So I did take that. I did a handshake and I took that challenge up with Dr. Rodriguez. We've got a patient who's stage 2 kidney disease, and this patient, he has elevated molecules that we're going to be talking about on the show that drive disease. And they don't only drive kidney disease, these molecules drive heart disease, cancer, obesity, fatigue and pain, just not feeling older and not like you used to. So you used to wake up in the morning and feel like you wanted to jump up to a hopeful new day. These molecules make you feel like you want to stay in bed and you ain't what you used to be. They also drive pain. And we're going to be describing these molecules and also talk about simple, natural answers. And I've taken on this challenge with Dr. Rodriguez, and we're going to see if in 4 months he can put his kidney where his mouth is and decide that he's going to change the way he practices medicine. You know, that's our biggest addictions, as I always say, is our perceptions. And when you go through med school in one way, you get a perception that this is the template, how medicine is practiced. And there's a lot of ways in which it's marvelous and saves us. But when you have a disease that's only worsening and you're on the disease conveyor belt and train, that's not really helpful for you to really figure out, why do you have this disease? What molecules are driving this disease? How might you test them? And how might you turn the tides to either get rid of the disease, minimize the disease, or completely improve the quality of life living with it? So this is all about taking charge and leaning forward into your own health. This is really a version of biohacking, the desire to be the best version of yourself by taking a look at the molecules that make you who you are. And if those molecules are going south and bad, how do you measure them and how do you improve them? Now, the 3 molecules that we happen to be talking about today are one called galectin 3. And the way that is spelled is GALECTIN, galectin 3. The other one is TMAO, trimethylamine N oxide. TMAO is the acronym, and the other one is transforming growth factor beta 1. We're going to focus on just 2 of those, galectin and TMAO. That's enough. But I want you to know that these molecules drive a lot of heart disease, kidney disease, cognitive decline, obesity, pain. These are the molecules that make the disease manifest in the individual way that it's manifesting. Now, of course, there's other players that promote these molecules. So everything's got a reason why it exists. So why do these molecules even exist? We're going to be talking about them, but heavy metals, stealth infections, genetic tendencies toward diseases, they can affect the levels of these molecules in your body. But basically, these molecules run the show. They enter from stage left and enter center stage. So we're going to talk, what are they? How do they cause disease? And if they're elevated and they cause disease and suffering, how do we tamp them down to a level where they won't drive us to keeping in a disease state? And how do we get them low enough so that we just feel like the best version of ourselves, even if we're going to turn 72 next year, even if we're going to turn 83 next year? So the first molecule that we're talking about is galectin. So let me explain even what a galectin is. A galectin is a family of 15 proteins which are called lectins, like gluten is a lectin. But this is a special kind of carbohydrate binding lectins, and they're highly linked to initiating and worsening cancer, heart disease, kidney disease, and even premature death. Galectin, there's a number of different galectins. There have been 15 discovered in mammals, 9 of which are in you and me, in humans. For you geeks out there, the 9 galectins that are in us are galectin 1, galectin 2, 3, 4, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 12. But galectin 15 is the big deal. These are also termed S-type lectins because they depend on a molecule that begins with the letter S, a sulfide. So they have a dependency on disulfide bonds for their stability and to bind to carbohydrates. The big one we're looking at, the big driver of nastiness, is galectin 3. It's a very sticky lectin. By the way, that's kind of what gluten is. It's a super glue kind of major lectin that goes as it travels throughout the body and adheres to cells and cause havoc. So does galectin 3. It's like a super gluten type molecule. If you want to think about glutens getting vilified, galectin 3 is like a super gluten. It is found in small amounts of everybody's body, but scientific research shows that when you have really high amounts inside your body, which you can test by a basic blood test, Quest runs it. If your doctor won't run it for you, you can most likely walk into any lab test now, blood laboratory that anyone can walk in and order tests without a requisition from a doctor. Most of the time, you can order this on your own. But scientific research has been showing that the higher that we have these levels inside our body, the more we have serious vulnerability to nasty outcomes in our future and more damage to specific organs. So reducing galectin 3 levels is critically important to maintaining health and longevity and averting acute crises. Every day. Now, if you mention this molecule to your doc, in fact, like I did to this kidney doc, he said, I don't know what this is. I don't even know how to run it. I don't know what you're talking about. But there's so much scientific literature on this from prestigious institutions. It's just that they haven't dribbled down into the clinical trenches, and it certainly wasn't taught in med school when most of the doctors that you're visiting and sitting across the desk from you didn't have this exposure. A new scientific paper on galectin linking it directly to diseases is found almost every single day. It's found when it's elevated to be linked, for example, to the very thing that makes cancer leave its primary tumor where it first begins and travel throughout your body. That's when cancer kills you, not the primary tumor, but bits of the primary tumor that travel to distant tissues and then attacks those. Those are called metastases, or a short term METs. METs are driven by galectin. Galectin gathers together in 5 little clumps. There's 5 galactin molecules that will surround a cancer molecule and hide it from the immune system and help it to travel and make it stick to other tissues and adhere and even help it get a blood supply. So one of the big things you want if you're at risk of cancer or you have cancer is you're going to want to know a natural answer, which we're going to share toward the later part of this talk, on how you disassemble those 5 molecules of galactin sticking together, making your cancer scenario or even your cancer in chemo intervention acts of elbow grease to protect yourself, really not knocking against a brick wall because you've got galactin fighting against your efforts. It's linked with kidney cancer, kidney disease, chronic heart failure, premature death, stroke, ulcerative colitis, rheumatoid arthritis, type 2 diabetes. It kind of drives a lot of issues. So you all know that I was a DES daughter. My mother took this nasty drug given as a prenatal vitamin to multiple millions of women from 1938 to 1979 till it was banned as the most cancer-causing drug ever invented. And they knew when they gave DES in experiments, as they were trying to figure out why a lot of the babies born to moms given this prenatal vitamin ended up having cancer, they knew if they gave pregnant hamsters, Syrian hamsters, DES, 100% of the offspring developed kidney tumors. And in the 1990s, when they were trying to figure out what was the underlying mechanism by which DES in utero, in the womb exposure, caused the offspring to have a really high, we're talking very few things in science have 100% outcome, have a consistent production of kidney tumors, it was because DES upregulated galactin-3 in the bodies of these hamsters. And galactin-3 in really high levels, remember 5 of them clumped together, surround cancer cells, create an environment in the body that's very damaging, pro-inflammatory, pro-carcinogenic. So galactin-3 drives cancer proliferation. It drives metastasis, which is how cancer kills us. It drives dying early from a wide number of causes. In May of 2011, there was a groundbreaking galactin-3 mortality study on over 8,000 people that was presented at a European conference. And the results of this study showed that people who have really high levels of galactin have an increased overall mortality 3 times more than the general population. So in essence, galactin is being looked at as a novel biomarker for a diverse set of diseases, the things that mostly kill us, heart disease, kidney disease, which when I worked in the dialysis center with Dr. Moncrief, he would always say the kidney drives the heart. And a lot of the markers that we now look at for early markers of issues with both of these organs, they're the same. So galactin-3 being elevated means your kidney is at risk and your heart is at risk. But if we know that when it's elevated, if we bring it down, we're making the terrain of your body healthier. Then this is an exciting thing. This gives us something to do that's positive and substantiated in peer-reviewed data. And it isn't just going in for that yearly physical or every 6 months or every 3 months. As you get older, you go to see your docs more often, crossing your fingers and hoping you just didn't get worse. But you don't really know what to do to turn the tide. So galactin is being looked at as a diagnostic or prognostic marker, especially with heart disease, kidney disease, and cancer. So another understanding of galactin in cancer is that it advances the way cancer cells, as they travel, get fed, so they stay alive. That's called angiogenesis, blood vessel formation to the tumor itself, so it starts getting a blood supply, a fuel supply. Galactin-3 turns on angiogenesis, so it helps cancer cells travel from the primary tumor, and then it helps them be fed to keep them alive. There is an article that came out called, I love when titles give you an idea of what's inside the body of the information, called Circulating Galactin-3 in the Bloodstream, an emerging promoter of cancer neogenesis. Now, galactin-3 doesn't do this all by its lonesome. It has a best friend, and that is transforming growth factor beta 1. That's a cytokine which, when it's in normal low levels in the body, it does a lot of good things. When it's in large levels of the body, it does a lot of bad things. It promotes fibrosis, making tissues turn from normal to fibrotic, and it drives a lot of disease. A lot of environmental docs will measure it in patients because if you had heavy mold exposure, you might have higher levels of transforming growth factor beta 1, and that drives some of the inflammation and suffering and pain in mold patients. But both galactin-3 and TGF beta 1 drive all the fibrosis in the body. And fibrosis, when it starts to occur in the kidney or it starts to occur in the heart, your heart gets remodeled in a bad way, and it drives heart failure and kidney failure. But if you could measure these in your bloodstream and see that they were elevated and have nutritional natural interventions to bring them down, you can reverse the nasty changes in your heart and kidney if you find them early enough, and regain health. Now that's biohacking at the nth degree. There was even an article that came out a few months ago in April of 2018 that the title really kind of blew me away. It's called The Emerging Role of Galactins in High Fatality Cancers. So how do you figure out which cancer cells are going to be the ones where your life is so much more on the line? And what characterizes a high fatality cancer? That means that it goes systemic and your immune system can't fight it. There's resistance against your interventions. You don't respond well to radiation, to chemo, maybe even to nutritional interventions. And there is an increased invasive immortality behavior. It just invades you worse and you can't handle it. So what they did in this study is they took a look at the levels of galactin-3 and discovered that the more galactin-3 in the patient, the more fatal acting the cancer was, which common sense then says, let's bring that galactin-3 down. And these authors, by the way, defined the level of galactin in a cancer patient. They called it the galactinome, GALECTINOME. You know, they love these days to say it's the microgenderome or biome or microhome. This is the galactinome. The galactinome, how much galactin-3 you've got in your body, gives a personality of aggressiveness to the cancer that you have, so that all cancer patients or anyone at high risk should be monitoring this molecule inside their body. We know that pancreatic cancer doesn't respond to chemo like other cancers do. It's a nasty kind of cancer. There is one doctor in the US with the same last name as mine who is doing a lot of exciting things and getting better results than most pancreatic cancer doctors, Dr. Bert Berkson. But they took a look at the blood in patients with pancreatic cancer, and they found that they had very high levels of galactin-3. And if they gave unique galactin-3 inhibitors, this exerted anti-pancreatic cancer activity by blocking the galactin-3. There's a study that shows that, women with stage 4 ovarian cancer who are fighting for their life. This article was by Isaac Elias. He's a medical doctor in Santa Rosa, California, who's really taking a look at natural answers to bring down galectin. He found that the role of galectin was an amazing marker of the aggressiveness of cancer and the inflammatory robustness of stage 4 ovarian cancer patients, and that gave us a clinical traffic director with which to help bring down inflammation, fibrosis, angiogenesis, and give us a way that's clinically relevant to help these patients. We know that galectin 3 is linked to heart disease. When it's elevated in the blood, it's linked to promoting events that lead to heart failure, including myofibroblast proliferation, so fibrosis, so cells that shouldn't be there, starting to change the shape of your heart as the tissues, the basic cells change. There's a lot of inflammation, there's poor cell repair, and there's adverse and nasty tissue remodeling. So elevated levels of galectin in the blood have been found to be significantly associated with a higher risk of death in acute decompensated heart failure as well as chronic heart failure populations. And they're now thinking that galectin 3 basically drives arteries getting calcified and a need as you get older for stents. An article came out 2 years ago in the Journal of the American Heart Association. This is not an Aunt Polly snake oil newsletter. The title of this was Drives Calcification in Arteries and Need for Stents, Role for Galectin 3 in Calcific Aortic Valve Stenosis. So we think it helps put plaque down in your arteries. The higher your levels, it helps put plaque. And so they took blood samples and aortic valves from 77 patients and who had very high levels of galectin 3 and compared them to patients who didn't have very high levels of galectin 3. And they saw that there was a lot more plaque if you have higher levels of galectin 3 in your blood than not. And most of our blood tests to figure out if you're at risk for the two nastiest adverse events, which are myocardial infarct, heart attack, or stroke. How much at risk are you for these nasty events? We have estimated, look at your lipids. Here's something that we could measure in your blood added to that gives a bigger picture. I always so appreciate and love a bigger picture to get us to be the healthiest that we can be. Now, with the kidneys, there's a lot of information from very prestigious societies. For example, one study from the American Society of Nephrology. This is the Kidney Doc Society. And it's called The Elevated Galectin 3 Precedes the Development of Chronic Kidney Disease. Now, chronic kidney disease is a worldwide health problem. After you're about 40 or 45, the filtering systems, the glomeruli of your kidney just start to age about 1% a year if you're healthy. And with a very acid processed food diet, the kidneys love to be alkaline. With a very acid diet, we tend to see a lot more kidney disease. So it's a big public health problem. God forbid you ever end up on dialysis. You're on Medicaid and the country has to pay for you. It's a horrific thing. It affects everyone in your family. And in this study, they were talking about since chronic kidney disease is usually diagnosed only later on. In fact, I was having dinner with a colleague when I was lecturing in Nashville a few weeks ago, and she's had a kidney transplant. And she said, I didn't even feel anything till my kidney function went down to about 15%. It's a silent progression. And you're not a candidate for dialysis or transplant until your function gets below 10%. You can only filter out your blood with the waste products 10% as much as a healthy person can. And that when you get to that level, you've got a tenth of the capability of someone without kidney disease that you're at risk of dialysis or transplant. But all the time, with you can be losing a lot more percentage of loss, it's pretty much silent. Diabetes plays a role in it, excess alcohol plays a role in it, but galactin 3 plays a role in it. So in this article in the American Society of Nephrology, they were saying there's a pressing clinical need for novel biomarkers to figure out who are the at-risk, high-at-risk individuals at the earliest stage possible. And galactin 3 is one of those molecules. But when I talked to my trusted, really good guy, kidney doc friend, Dr. Rodriguez, he'd never heard of this molecule. So galactin 3 even has been described by prestigious institutions in peer-reviewed literature that if it's very elevated and you have chronic kidney disease, you are at heightened risk of it going south rather quickly, going down toward that 10% level where your life is changed forever. And when you go into the dialysis unit and it's 4 or 5 hours, 3 times a week, and it's a huge I'm not even going to go into the entire set of details that make up the dialysis experience, but it's a really big deal. Out of all that effort and all that pain and all that suffering and all that equipment, going in 3 times a week, 4 to 5 hours a day each time, you're only bringing back 10% of the kidney function, which is why Dr. Moncrief co-invented the home unit called it continuous ambulatory peritoneal dialysis, or CAPD, was so that there could be a unit you could do at home and clean yourself out every day instead of 3 days a week, and you'd get better than 10% kidney function. But what if you had kidney issues in your family? You look and you go on your yearly physical and your kidney function's going down a little bit. What if there was another biomarker that gave you a flashing red light that your kidneys were in distress and you could turn it around? Now, it takes diet, it takes change, it takes the desire to say, what can I do? And I'll do it, not just the magic pill consciousness, but what are the things that tamp galactin 3 down? So modified citrus pectin comes from the inside of citrus fruits. And it's been modified because the inside of citrus fruits, the polyphenolic compound, isn't so easy to digest. So it's modified so it's absorbable. And it does require the body taking in a lot of potassium in the process of doing that. So if you are a kidney patient where your doctor has put you on a potassium-sparing diet, because as your kidney function goes down, you tend to not process some of the minerals as well, you need to really do this with a health professional. But modified citrus pectin is a natural galectin 3 inhibitor, demonstrated in published research to decrease the expression of galectin 3, disassemble those 5 galectin molecules holding inflammatory molecules or cancer molecules as prisoners, and disassemble them and block the damage caused by excess galectin through the body. It takes a year or 2 of being on this to really bring your levels down, but the minute you start taking twice a day modified citrus pectin, you start disassembling the ability for it to do nasty things inside your body. So there is a God, and when you start this nutritional intervention, you immediately start getting benefit, even if you monitor the levels and they're not going down numerically. You are getting benefit biochemically. Now, there's one other natural answer, and that's this drug that seems to be so amazing. It was one of the main drugs that I had put together with my colleagues in that drug when I had my own drug company, and I did get to work with Dr. Moncrief because we were using this drug in his practice, and one of the elements was an herb. In fact, in 2004, the FDA came out and said you can now add herbs to pharmaceuticals. So when I read that, I was like, whoa, I'm going to be one of the first people to add an herb to a pharmaceutical. And thus we made this product. And it was for patients on dialysis or who had so suppressed immune systems that they couldn't heal wounds very easily. So the medication was for non-responsive, non-healing wounds. And one of the main herbs in this was turmeric. And now I understand that one of the mechanisms by which it works, it has a huge number of mechanisms, like turmeric acts like an herbal NSAID. But the problem with NSAIDs, we were discovering they're so nonsteroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, very, very bad for us. They have so many downstream adverse consequences, is that they block inflammation completely. And the very beginning forms of healing cause a natural, healthy increase in inflammation, and then you don't want it to be sustained. And turmeric is a herb that allows that initial inflammation, healing inflammation to occur, but then it blocks the rest of the nasty inflammation. Now, the way that it does that is multiple. So when I wrote up the papers that we presented to the FDA for that drug, there were all these ways turmeric did its cool herbal magic. Oh, there was A, B, C, and D. I didn't know about this one, that turmeric curcumin, or turmeric, which is made up of 3 curcuminoids, is a potent inhibitor of galactic-3 expression. In fact, there's a paper that came out called A Potent Inhibitor of Galactic-3 Expression, Turmeric Curcumin. They analyzed the impact of the curcuminoids on the expression of galectin, and they discovered that it decreases the blood levels, and it decreases it surrounding cancer cells. In this case, it was in glioblastoma, brain cancer cells, which are, you get it. That's what we just had a very beloved politician just die of that. It's a brain cancer diagnosis. It tends to be a death diagnosis, but here is something we can do. We can intervene with galactin-3 inhibitors. So you can start modified citrus pectin. You can purchase it from Thorne, which is a doctor's company, has Thorne modified citrus pectin. Dr. Elias, who's done a lot of the research, he's an Israeli medical doctor and researcher and scientist. He sells it from his website, Dr. Isaac Galais. You could purchase it from him. It comes with a little scooper, and a typical person to be healthy takes 1 scoop a day. A person who wants to ward off cancer, high risk, maybe had cancer, does a scoop twice a day. And if you're in the midst of cancer, you want to do a scoop and a half twice a day. And remember, the second that you start taking modified pectosol is another name for it. It's citrus pectin altered so your body can absorb it. And don't forget that if you have problems with potassium, you really need to do this under the monitoring and overseeing of a doctor that knows what they're doing, but most doctors don't know what this molecule is. The second one is turmeric, and turmeric is not all that easily absorbed. So you want to either get turmeric that has a little black pepper added to it, or there's modified turmeric. It's called Mariva, and Thorne makes a fabulous Mariva called Mariva 500. And there's also a brand new company. Al Zapp was the president of Thorne, a genius in our industry, and he sold Thorne a few years ago and had a non-compete clause. And during that time, he created another company, because most of us that are in functional medicine don't ever want to retire because we're so passionate about what we do. So we created a company called Tesrec, and he has a turmeric product that is available in a new delivery system that he has shown enhances its bioavailability even more. Because the regular turmeric you buy in the stores is not all that available. It's a root, and it's not easily absorbed, just like the citrus pectin had to be modified to enhance its absorption. And also, you want to purchase turmeric only from a doctor's line that has to be held accountable to a heavy metal analysis once a month, because a lot of the countries that sell these herbs are paid by weight, and they add lead or there's lead in their soil because they have less same governmental regulatory standards for lead in their soil and environment. And you can be getting a toxicity along with it. So you have to be very careful. In fact, there was just a recall of curry because the turmeric in a lot of the over-the-counter grocery store curries had so much lead in it. So you want to be very careful. You want an absorbable form of turmeric, and you want a doctor's line that is accountable so it's free from heavy metals, so you're not trying to do something healthy and making yourself worse. Now, there's probably a lot of other illnesses. We talked about cancer, kidney disease, heart disease, but galectin is a sticky lectin, galectin 3. And it can probably cause a lot more issues in our tissues found throughout our body. For example, the eye. There are studies to show that the trabecular meshwork, including the uvula, the cornea, maybe the optic nerve, these are affected by elevated galectin. This one article was called Carbohydrate Binding Proteins, Galectin 1 and 3 in the Human Trabecular Meshwork. In fact, I had a patient who just had a lens put in. He was getting older and his lens was getting cloudy, so he had the surgery that many people get and never have trouble with. But he was a person that had a terrible, one of the atypical serious complications. Is it because he has elevated levels of a galectin 3? Let's measure them and see. Because any issue that you have, if you have elevated galectin in your tissues, it could be one of the things you need to deal with to get yourself really well at the root cause level. Now, galectin 3 is found in high levels in the blood of Alzheimer's patients. The article title of that one is Elevated Galectin 3 in the Serum of Patients with Alzheimer's Disease, because galectin can cause inflammation and damage in the brain. This data suggested that galectin 3 potentially plays a role in how the brain becomes demented, or what we call a role in the neuropathogenesis of Alzheimer's disease. So I'm beginning to feel that this is one of the molecules we should run on ourselves no matter what. Before you even have a disease to put a name to, look and see if this molecule is elevating, and then you can do the simple interventions to disassemble its aggressiveness and nastiness and bring yourself back to a place, biohack yourself back to a place where you can be a better version of yourself. Now, the next molecule we're talking about is TMAO, and that stands for trimethylamine N oxide. That's trimethyl, methyl, amine, amine, space, capital N dash oxide, trimethylamine oxide. It's a waste byproduct from your gut bacteria, and you don't want too much of this waste because this TMAO can drive disease too. Either you eat the foods that your body makes too much of it, or you've got the gut bacteria that your body makes too much of it, or you have kidney issues so you don't clear enough of it, or you've got pollutant issues because endocrine disrupting or hormone altering chemicals can increase your body's burden of it by increasing the enzyme that makes it, or you have the genetics that no matter how you eat, you just make a lot. In fact, this molecule helps you figure out if you're a good candidate for the ketogenic diet that's meat-driven or not meat-driven, because the majority of foods that you make this out of, if you've got the right gut bacteria, are animal products. So the foods that tend to be acted upon by gut bacteria and then make this are foods that are rich in choline, lecithin, and L-carnitine. Now, what are those foods? Red meats, eggs, dairy, and saltwater fish, and even some plant foods like asparagus and soy. But the big idea that studies have shown is that some people can eat those foods and not make a lot of TMAO. Some people eat those foods and make a large amount of this nasty waste byproduct. And so that would be a big point in this, whether you're a good person to do a ketogenic diet or not. If it's going to be a lot of chicken and meat and eggs and even fish, do you make a lot of TMAO out of that or not? That's a really interesting looking thing. Now, what happens is you consume these foods. So like, for example, an egg yolk is real high in choline. And the bacteria in your gut, if you've got the right bacteria in your gut, which it looks like Firmicutes loves these to munch on these food source constituents much more than Bacteroides. So it's interesting. We're going to link this to being one of the reasons why you can't lose weight. If you have really elevated TMAO and you have a lot more Firmicutes, then you make a lot of more TMAO and it makes your fat cells act nastier and less responsive to your weight loss efforts, even fasting. So the bacteria, if you have the right kind, munch on choline, lecithin, which could be phosphatidylcholine, L-carnitine, and then they squirt out a molecule called TMA, which is the trimethylamine part. And the TMA travels through your blood and it Ubers on over to your liver where oxygen is added to this, and the TMA becomes oxidized primarily by the enzyme FMO3. So the more FMO3 you have, the more TMAO you make from TMA. Well, dioxins, pesticides, probably glyphosate, I don't know if we have the research yet, DES, these chemicals in the chemical soup we live in, many of them upregulate this enzyme so that we make a lot more TMAO, that nasty waste product from the TMA. Bruce Blumberg is a scientist from UC Irvine, and I interviewed him for Hormone Deception, and he discussed how certain chemicals exposed to a pregnant animal make the offspring obese no matter what they do. And he called these chemicals, and one of the chemicals he studied a lot is tributylin, which is painted on the bottom of boats so that barnacles and things don't stick to it. But it's also now being looked at as a lot of chemicals having obesogenic activity, making fat cells very resistant to change. He recently gave a talk at the American Academy of Medicine, and it was called The Transgenerational Effects of Obesogens, where he could expose a hormone-altering chemical to a pregnant animal and not expose any of the offspring, and the offspring all had trouble with obesity all the way to the 4th generation. And if he fasted them, they didn't lose weight even when they didn't eat, compared to offspring that were not exposed to this chemical in utero. And all these chemicals, the way obesogens I prophesize work is by upregulating, making more of this enzyme FMO3, so you make more TMAO. So if your body has the right bacteria, which is more of the bad to the good bacteria, and we know that people who have more Firmicutes to Bacteroides tend to get fat and have trouble losing weight no matter what they do. Well, this is the mechanism by where it happens. And we know that chemicals in the environment are making us harder to lose weight in 2018 than it was in 1980. This is part of the mechanism. You have more of this enzyme, you have more TMAO. And you're probably not a person that should do the ketogenic diet, because even though you might lose weight on it in the beginning, you're making more TMAO. That's a waste product that drives disease like galectin-3 drove disease. But pollution is part of the issue. It isn't just diet. If your microbes also are ill, so you could either eat too many plant foods for your gut microbes to process healthfully, so you make too much TMAO. You can eat too many plant foods for your gut microbes to process healthfully, like soy, beets, and spinach. And a lot of us are eating more beets because it makes nitric oxide. If your kidneys are having trouble clearing it, because your kidneys clear, you remember kidneys clear these nasty molecules. They're filters for the bad stuff. But if they're not good filters, you could have an elevation of it. And if you have dysbiosis, so you have more bad to good bacteria in your gut, but you could also have more bad to good bacteria in other biomes that crosstalk with your gut. So I was talking to Dr. Sam Rabir, the gastroenterologist who runs the LA Gastroenterology and Nutrition Center, and he was saying he sees elevated TMAO frequently in SIBO patients. So high levels of TMAO have been reported to increase the risk of heart disease, premature death from a lot of things, strokes, AFib, cancer, high blood pressure, obesity, kidney disease, kind of similar to galectin 3. And it behooves you to figure out if you've got elevated TMAO and then figure out what you can do to bring it down. And we'll give some natural answers at the end of this talk. And if you just do a simple search on TMAO and cardiovascular, which I did yesterday on PubMed, you'll quickly come up with about 200, at the time of this show, 265 articles just linking high TMAO with worse heart issues. I'm not going to go through everything, but in a meta-analysis of 19 studies with almost 20,000 patients, high TMAO that you can just measure in your blood was associated with increased risk of heart disease, heart failure, and stroke. They're now thinking the TMAO initiates heart disease and causes hardening in the arteries. And we just learned galectin 3 causes plaque in the arteries. So both of these molecules, when they're elevated, act to make you much more at risk of heart disease. And this is part of the way heart disease starts. And some people can eat a lot of fat and not get heart disease, and other people can't. We know that mice who have been raised to have severe heart disease, if they're given TMAO blockers, their heart disease reverses. AFib, atrial fibrillation, is the terrible thing because you're much at risk of stroke and your heart rapidly beats. People who have higher levels of TMAO have higher risk of AFib. Just about every form of cardiovascular disease is associated with an excessively high level. It should be about below a 6 or 7. If you're at a 40, you've got to take action. But if you go in for your physical, maybe none of this shows up and your doc says you're fine, but you don't feel so fine. There's a Norwegian study of about 7,000 people that showed the higher your TMAO level was, the more likely you were going to get atrial fibrillation. And this study showed that TMAO independently predicted susceptibility to atrial fibrillation. Let's do that again. I have to stick my teeth back in. Outside of all the other traditional AFib risk factors, and people that with the higher levels tended to have the kind of AFib that was more constant and much more dismaying and, of course, needed intervention. And that's because they're learning that high levels of TMAO directly damage the electrical system of the heart, and that TMAO may rewire your heart's electrical system by altering the autonomic nervous system. And we're seeing an epidemic right now in young teenage girls of autonomic nervous systems gone awry. If you go to the Mayo Clinic site, they say 1 out of 100 young teenage girls has POTS disease or dysautonomia. Should we be measuring their TMAO levels? TMAO heightens platelets to stick together, be more reactive, so there's more risk of clotting events. It's linked to higher risk of a first-time stroke in people with high blood pressure. So if you have high blood pressure, if you had a stroke, if you're at risk of these things, shouldn't you be getting your TMAO measured? And we're going to tell you some ways to biohack it back down that really are effective. High levels of TMAO are showed making the inside of your artery, the intimal, it's called the carotid intimal media thickness. How thick is the inside of your artery and how stiff is it? That's a form of heart disease. That the higher your TMAO molecule in your blood, the stiffer the inside lining of your blood vessels, which is blood disease. It's linked with diabetes. People who have high levels of TMAO have a higher risk of diabetes. That's why some people can have higher blood glucose levels but not get diabetes, and some people do. Should we be looking at all difficult and all diabetic patients at their TMAO levels? And it's linked to glucose intolerance, insulin resistance, increased inflammation. And of course, if it's linked to insulin resistance, there's articles that then link it to cancer because we know that insulin resistance is highly linked to cancer. Elevated TMAO impairs kidney functions. There's numerous articles that show that chronic kidney disease patients that have higher levels of TMAO compared to controls have an increased risk of mortality and more adverse events. It's linked to obesity. We just talked, this might be the missing link of obesogens. TMAO producing enzyme regulates obesity. So there's an obesogenic agent, which is the TMAO, a downstream metabolic product that comes from the way you eat, but it can also come from pollutants that you get exposure to. So just to summarize, TMAO is linked to heart disease, even AFib, to type 2 diabetes, to obesity and energy metabolism, body weight, body fat mass. It's known to work via the FMO3 enzyme. And if you knock down that enzyme, then in mice and experimental models, they start losing weight when they couldn't lose weight before. So part of you're having difficulty losing weight, is it because you have an elevated TMAO? And if we knock it down, will you then get more benefit from all your hard work, the exercise, the better portion control, etc.? So let's talk about how TMAO increases the risk of cancer and heart disease, maybe even fatty liver disease, obesity. How does it do all this? How does this happen? Well, it's very inflammatory in high levels in the body, so it ups inflammation. For example, it ups very high levels of TNF alpha, which is an inflammatory cytokine, and it ups C-reactive protein, which is high sensitivity C-reactive protein is a marker of heart disease, or resistance and thickening of the inner lining of your blood vessels. There is a TMAO paradox, in that if you eat fish really elevates TMAO, yet fish has been linked, especially fish in your diet has been linked with lowering the risk of heart disease. So just like there is a French paradox, there's a TMAO paradox. But they've also did one study where and this was done a year ago, where they gave animal sources to healthy young men, and they looked to see who made more TMAO and who didn't. And the people that had healthier gut microbiota made less TMAO. So it has to do, remember, with dysbiosis. So if you really want to bring down TMAO, there's a number of things that you can do. First of all, you can lower your meat intake, because we know meat is very high in L-carnitine, and L-carnitine in foods elevates it. We know that dairy lowers it, and we've been telling people to kind of avoid dairy, so maybe going to the smaller animal dairies like sheep and goat if you can handle it. We know that you can do, there's some superfoods that lower TMAO, and these superfoods are resveratrol and pistachio nuts and Brussels sprouts. Brussels sprouts are like a superfood that lower TMAO. And if you want a recipe to cook Brussels sprouts, you've always hated them, I have a recipe that most people who historically say they hate Brussels sprouts eat this Brussels sprout recipe and then just purr like a kitty or mew like a pussy. But resveratrol is very powerful at lowering TMAO. So you start cutting out the heavier animal products and go on resveratrol. I like to use Integrative Therapeutics. There's lots of different brands. 2 twice a day starts really lowering it pretty rapidly, as long as you cut down on the heavy animal products too. Giving prebiotics and probiotics and soluble fiber. Fiber is known to really help improve the intestinal microbiome, and then as you eat these foods, the gut microbiome doesn't make so much TMAO. So fiber is great to get insoluble fiber and have it, and in even soluble fiber, you can get a mixture of both. It really helps bring TMAO down. By the way, in one study, consuming Brussels sprouts every single day, how did it do the magic that it does to lower TMAO? It decreased that obesity enzyme. It decrease the FMO3 enzyme. And that was a study done, a real small study in 10 volunteers, but they gave them Brussels sprouts and they measured that enzyme and the TMAO. So you can measure TMAO in your bloodstream. I called any lab test now and they don't measure it there, but Quest Laboratory measures it. So if you work with a doc that could order you a blood test through Quest, that's great. And if you want to You want to rule out dysbiosis because your gut bacteria acts on it. But remember, your nasal biome and your small intestinal biomes might be contributing to your large colonic biome. You want to eat much more plant-based food because TMAO, the quickest way to reduce it is to eliminate its source, which is animal foods. So if you have less animal foods, especially the yolk in eggs, and remember the unexplained paradox is fish. So unless you have a problem and a health problem, probably don't lower fish. But if you have TMAO elevated levels and you have these serious health problems, until you get it lower, you probably also do want to go off of fish. You want to avoid lecithin and carnitine from processed foods, energy drinks, and supplements. You want to check your renal function because TMAO is cleared by the kidneys. So you want to either look at your estimated glomerular filtration rate, or if you're working with a kidney doctor, get a 24-hour creatinine test. Or if your doctor or you want to go order it yourself in any lab test now, you can get a cystatin C, cystatin. The American Association of Nephrologists, the Nephrology American Association published a paper about 3-4 years ago saying our estimated blood tests aren't all that great at picking up kidney disease, and it's so important to do so. They recommended cystatin C as being the test to do. It's a blood test. When I worked in Oklahoma, it cost $15 to run it. But here in Austin, it costs several $100. But now you can walk into a lab and get it for about $150. And then you can see if you have elevated levels, not from the food, not from your bacteria, but from your kidney function. Or maybe it's a perfect storm and all of the above. But TMAO levels increase with decreasing kidney function, and that might be one reason why we see heart disease in kidney patients, because there is this shared adverse molecule. You want to keep your fat calories below 50% because really high diets elevate TMAO. So some people just aren't candidates for ketogenic diet, which are high in good fats but high in fat. You might want to do a plant ketogenic diet. I know we have a raw food guru here in Austin that teaches how to do a plant ketogenic diet. You want to consider resveratrol. There was that great article in Molecular Biology in April of 2016. It's called Resveratrol Attenuates TMAO, Induced Atherosclerosis by Regulating TMAO and Remodeling the Gut Microbiota. Now, that is a lot. So the one major thing, go on resveratrol. You can't get it by wine. You'd have to drink 40 to 50 glasses of wine a day, and I'm certainly not recommending that. But there is a growing body of evidence that phenolic phytochemicals with poor bioavailability, resveratrol is only absorbed so well, possibly give their benefit by acting on the gut microbiome by improving TMAO. That might be one of the ways herbs helps us, is how they modulate TMAO levels. Now, other foods that are high in resveratrol are the skins of peanuts, not the peanut themselves, but the skin, just like the grape skins are highest in resveratrol, more than the inside of the grape. Berries, nuts, and dark chocolate. There is a God, dark chocolate has resveratrol in it, and it makes me so happy. Now, sleep affects everything, and it affects your TMAO levels. If you don't sleep well, this elevates your TMAO. So sleep apnea is an enemy of TMAO. One study showed that going without sleep for 24 hours boosted high deleterious levels of TMAO. Fiber definitely can lower TMAO by about 60%. So if there's only two things you want to do, resveratrol and fiber, and cut down on the red meat, maybe this is the mechanism whereby we know red meat is inflammatory. We know that B vitamins and vitamin D help play a role in good TMAO levels. We know that balsamic vinegar and olive oil, which are Mediterranean food diets components, are helpful, but you really need to take them in large enough amounts. So I'd focus on the resveratrol, pistachio nuts, and the fiber. And there is some suggestion that those with high TMAO are harboring small intestinal bowel overgrowth syndrome. There's a study that came out a year ago, 2017, saying that TMA is only absorbed in the small intestine, And then, by the way, if you have bad bugs in the small intestine, they can munch on your choline molecules and make you choline deficient and make TMA out of that. And then that travels to the liver, adds an oxygen, makes TMAO. So could SIBO be causing elevated TMAO and actual choline deficiency? So it's interesting. This is a new way of taking a look at it. It's always great to stretch your perception of everything and how you take a look at it. And remember that dioxin-like pollutants increase that FMO3 enzyme, so you make more TMAO. So pollution has a lot to do with the solution, and that rhymes, and I'm going to start rapping, of helping everything. So in every single health problem today, detox and cleansing should be part of it. Really, I can't wait till we have insurance reimbursed detoxification centers, because it's so clear cut that our planet is dirty and it's contributing to our health issues, especially to our children, so that prior to conception, we need to detox so that our egg and sperm, high in fat, will be freed up of those chemicals, and a mother's body burden will be freed up so she doesn't download 80% in her breast milk to the baby that's suckling at her breast. So pollution is always part of the solution of everything, and it is with elevated TMAO levels too. So this has been quite the show. You have learned that there are molecules inside our body that could put us at risk of disease and drive our disease to nastier levels. And we can identify some of these, and we can drive them down to healthier levels that puts our disease process either at bay, or our risk of worsening improves it tremendously. Why wouldn't we want to do this? So you could go in year after year to your kidney doc, and your 24-hour creatinine or your estimated glomerular filtration rate looks stable, looks great, but underneath the surface, you have inflammation going on that they don't have any tests to look, see at, identify, and then take action. And boy, the action here isn't a pharmaceutical train. It is dietary, it is nutraceutical, and it is the bigger picture, like taking a look at how your biomes crosstalk. This is the new medicine, gang. This is the new biohacking, where you can go in, measure these yourself, bring them down yourself. Unless you have really severe kidney disease, work with somebody in the know. And there aren't any functional nephrologists out there, so maybe you want to get in touch with me, which you can go to drlindseyberkson.com and click on my consult section. I'm going to be starting a membership soon to really have people have more access to me. I'd love to hear your comments on this. You can reach me via my website. I have a new article that came out today on the nasal biome and how that all works. I'm always loving, passionate about passing information forward so you can biohack your life and be the best version of yourself, no matter what anybody else says. You really can. So if you thought this show was helpful, if you've got friends with heart disease, kidney disease, obesity, diabetes, or cancer, please pass this forward. Please go to iTunes and let them know, give a review, what you think of the work that goes into a show like this, so that you can be the best that you can be. Blessings, everybody. It's been a pleasure. Bye.